pretty strong upper level trough is making its way into the Great Lakes region on Sunday. In this video, we're going to talk about what tracks are being shown by the models and how that's going to influence our severe weather threat. Hello everybody, the time is 8:01 p.m. and it is August 4th. Good morning to you all. Welcome to another update from Great Lakes Weather. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to August. We are in one of the last months of meteorological summer, and we're going to see some severe weather along with this season. And I mean, this is typical for August. We start to see severe weather across parts of the Great Lakes region during the months of July and August, and boy did we see it during July. We had a very active weather pattern, and it appears that's going to continue into Sunday with the potential for tornadoes, damaging winds, and hail across the Great Lakes region. Now, exactly where is that going to play out? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. So let's get right to it. First of all, I want to touch on how much rain we got for July. We got a lot of rain in quite a few places. I think some places in Michigan saw well over 6 inches of rain during the month of July, and that's actually really changed up how our drought is shaping up across much of the Great Lakes region. You notice that there's some places that are still dealing with some moderate to severe drought conditions like northern Michigan, moderate drought conditions in western Indiana, and then not as much in Ohio, but you can see the places that were experiencing severe drought across southern lower Michigan have been pretty much gone, taken out, which that's definitely good news. We're getting rid of that drought. We're starting to see definitely good news for the farmers as well, but looks like that will probably continue into Sunday as well with the expectation of a lot of rainfall. It looks like flooding could be a pretty big concern with this setup, and I'll show you why on the models in just a minute. First of all, before we get to the models, let's take a look at the severe weather hazards from the SPC. You do notice there's a slight risk highlighted for quite a bit of our region as well. Southwest lower Michigan, Indiana, and then western Ohio. Now the thing is though, with this setup, there's still a little bit of confusion with regards to the track of the system. The models are putting out 3 different possible tracks for the low pressure system, and the question is, which track is that likely going to take? Currently the SPC is hinting at, okay, it looks like the main potential for severe thunderstorms is going to be in this region highlighted under the slight risk, and especially places farther to the north that are going to be closer to that surface low. Places that are close to that surface low are likely going to have more elevated tornado potential, which means it's likely could be focused around northern Indiana, southwest lower Michigan, northwest Ohio, which we've dealt with a lot of that in the past couple of weeks, but still looks like that could be the focus of mainly the tornado potential, depending on how the models outplay this low pressure system's placement. That's currently what the SPC is thinking about. Down here, it looks like more of a damaging wind threat, southern Indiana, Kentucky, western Ohio in that as well. And it looks like the instability is going to be low, but the shear and the wind shear is going to be rather elevated with that surface low. So that's really going to be more of the factor that plays into this severe weather setup. Not necessarily the instability. The more instability, definitely going to be a more heightened severe weather setup, but it also has a lot to do with that wind shear associated with the trough that's coming into the area. So let's take a look at just generally what we have, the most recent update from the models, the GFS. Let's get to Sunday. Now there's 3 different tracks that play out here, and I want you to pay attention to all the different placements of the low pressure system, because all of those will have influence on our severe weather setup. First of all, GFS is hinting at the low pressure system being displaced farther to the north. That's what the GFS is talking about, and it looks like the center of low pressure kind of shifts farther to the south. This is sort of where the models have been trending towards, and I think that's why the SPC is hinting at a farther southern mode for severe weather setup. So notice the low pressure system sitting over kind of the Chicago region, and then what we're expecting is that we're going to have those storms that are going to fire just a little bit ahead of that surface low. And if you get a sounding out ahead of those storms across northern Indiana, now you notice the GFS really doesn't play out the wind shear as strong as other models do, but you do notice that there will still be some storms that fire along this boundary. Especially this region right here is probably the area I'll be targeting for potential severe weather. Western Indiana, maybe even go into eastern Illinois, eastern Illinois, Lafayette, Indiana, and Champaign, Illinois. Sorry, I just woke up this morning. It's 8:06, but you do have the setup for thunderstorms, especially in this warm sector that looks like to be surging in ahead of this warm front and then the cold front on the back side as well, capable of producing that severe potential with the more elevated wind shear that will be coming in along with that. So warm front's really going to be the key factor into where the severe weather setup goes. Right now the warm front is looking to be kind of in this area here. Areas to the south of that will likely see the more profound severe weather setup, and closer to that surface low is where we will more likely see that tornado potential included with this setup. So that's what the GFS is playing out. We'll look at the wind dynamics in the atmosphere in a minute. I want to use the ECMWF for that. But the GFS is hinting more towards a later mode. All the models really hint at this low pressure system moving a little bit slower than usual, but still it is a very strong trough for this time of the year. So now notice there's a lot of moisture that's going to be embedded with this system, which is really why we're looking at the potential for maybe a couple inches of rain across any places where these rain bands pretty much set up and focus themselves. So that's going to have influence on the drought for those places that are still experiencing drought, and also may cause a little bit of flash flooding in some areas across the Great Lakes region as well. Now let's go to the Euro model, take a look at exactly what it is saying with regards to this setup. So let's get to Sunday, 7 a.m. You do notice there's going to be a little bit of convection ongoing during the morning, early afternoon hours. But again, despite the fact that the low is going to be placed further to the north, that it still does show coming down towards southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois. So I think the more profound severe weather setup for possible tornadoes is going to be, again, northern Illinois, southern Michigan, northern Indiana, and that's going to have a lot to do with the wind shear as well. But you notice that ECMWF kind of puts it out as a linear mode as it comes in around 7 p.m. across the lake. Cape values around 2,000, enough to foster severe weather development. Storm relativity of around over 100. Again, weak tornado threat with this. You have a slight curvature in the photograph. You do have a lot of speed and directional shear with the atmosphere associated with that upper trough that's going to be following along with this setup. And then it begins to move through, kind of continues to produce severe weather across eastern Indiana. Western Ohio could be included in that as well, but again, begins to dissipate once it leaves that favorable environment and you start to reach the morning hours. So still a lot of questions at play. I'm going to pause it here at the 7 p.m. ECMWF setup because you do notice that that convective line really starts to form during that point. Let's take a look at exactly what's going on in the atmosphere. Your dew points, again, dew points could reach the 70s in some spots associated with this. You're going to have a very saturated atmosphere in this region that, again, is highlighted by the slight risk by the Storm Prediction Center. And then you look at one thing that will have influence is the cloud cover ahead of it. There's not going to be too much cloud cover ahead of this severe weather setup, which again will allow for that instability to really take off. Going to the lapse rates, one thing that really gives me concern as to how this will set up is the lapse rates. You don't really have steep lapse rates with this setup. Again, what we're talking about is a lapse rate. With the lapse rate is the air decreasing in temperature with height. So that's a decrease in temperature for every kilometer it rises in the atmosphere, and it says about 5 degrees Celsius for every kilometer that is currently showing in this place. Once you have steeper lapse rates, that creates a lot more vertical lift in the atmosphere, and that's what creates stronger updrafts with this, which again, I don't think the tornado threat's going to be super strong with this. Again, you don't really have that steep lapse rate that is going to be with this setup. So Cape values, though, you'll have some instability in the atmosphere. Mixed layer, you have instability around 2,000. Your most unstable Cape, again, your Cape values still remain around 2,000. Cloud bases get lower as they get to the main portion of the storm. You still have somewhat low cloud, not really super low cloud bases, but the low cloud bases will hit once that front starts to move into the area. Bulk shear, really don't show too much shear with. There is a little bit of wind shear in the atmosphere, but it doesn't really look super strong. One thing that really fosters this setup, again, is your winds at the mid-layer. Mid-layer winds are going to be at about 30 to 40 knots, and then your upper level winds will still kind of be supportive of that as well. 850 millibar winds. So you do have supportive winds. That's really the big thing that's fostering this severe storm setup is the wind support that is going to be with this upper level trough that's moving in. And you have it in many different layers of the atmosphere, which will create that speed and directional shear that will allow for those stronger storms to begin to develop. So that's really the key player in this setup is that wind support at different layers of the atmosphere, and not only that, but the change in wind direction that occurs, especially as you get closer to that low. You have southerly winds at the 850 millibar layer, and then the 700 millibar layer you have southwesterly winds, kind of creating that spin in the atmosphere, allowing for a little bit of storm relativity to sort of generate despite the low lapse rates that will be present with this setup. So still, that's really what's going to be amounting this severe storm setup. So depending on where the low sets up is really where we'll see that severe storm potential begin to evolve across the area. And I do think based on what the SPC says, it's going to be southern lower Michigan, northern Illinois, eastern Illinois, western Indiana, and then maybe even getting into western Ohio as well. But I do think the entire state of Indiana could be under the gun for severe weather tomorrow. Not really as viable in the southern portions, but still damaging winds will be present with that potential as well. I think it's going to be northern Indiana that could be dealing with the bigger storm threat. So that is one model, the Euro model, and it looks like to be the more viable model, and it's the model that, though it's displaced the low a little bit further to the north, I think the NAM might be still going on track, and we'll have to see what the HRRR says this evening, but I think the NAM might be on track with what we will see for the potential for severe weather. So let's go back to the loop image, because I want to show you exactly where this low tracks on the Euro real quick. So going back to where we were, here we are. All right, so this is 4 p.m. Got a few clusters of showers and thunderstorms developing along this low, and then southern Wisconsin, you notice that it starts to shift a little bit to the southeast, but kind of settles over this area and kind of moves rather slow. And you can see that the storms start to get ahead of the main low pressure system, and you notice that the low pressure system starts to take a northeastward shift. Now you do notice there's going to be a lot of rainfall afterwards as well, post-frontal rainfall associated with that low pressure system that's going to be moving out of the region. So that's where we can see still quite a bit of rain from this, which is why I think flooding potential is going to be there, and it's going to move out of the area by Monday evening, getting into Tuesday. We'll have much cooler temperatures, which will be pleasant. Will still be a pleasant sight despite the fact we've had some recently. So now the NAM plays it out a little bit different, and I want to show you exactly what the NAM says for this setup. Now notice here, one thing I want to point out about the NAM, again, NAM is kind of can be a little bit off with some things sometimes, but still good to be aware of what could possibly happen. So one thing the NAM's pointing out that the other models don't really project is the convection that could possibly occur ahead of the warm front. So it shows that there's going to be a lot of rain showers ahead of this warm front. Now, if that's the case, lower Michigan might be dealing with a lot less of a threat. I really think that areas that don't see much convection around 1 p.m., including western Indiana, eastern Illinois, will have that severe weather setup. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really looking at this region here, Lafayette, Indiana, and Champaign, Illinois, as my main setup point for a potential storm chase. Could be that region. Depending on how the models play this out, HRRR still has to come out later this evening, and that will have a role in my severe weather setup, and where I chase. So, again, 700 millibar winds. You still have some pushes of 700 millibar winds being shown, and one of them is in northern Indiana, and then the other one is in southwestern Indiana. You do see that push, 850 millibar winds, 500 millibar jet. Again, one thing the NAM does as well is that it kind of displaces the 500 millibar winds farther back, and they're not as strong as you get closer to this area. That's one thing that's different with regards to this. But again, let's take a look at some of these, what the NAM model is pointing out. The NAM model does point out a few steepening lapse rates ahead of the warm frontal boundary, so you do notice that the lapse rates get a little bit steeper, and then surface-based CAPE values are getting up to 2,000 after that warm front passes through, which again, why I think Lafayette, Indiana, Champaign, Illinois might be the place to go. Going to have to just keep watch on exactly what. And again, lower cloud bases start to go ahead of that warm front. You can really see where that warm frontal boundary is located by 1 p.m. according to the NAM model. So if that plays out, then we could have a really broad severe weather setup all around this region here. So bulk shear, got wind shear. Again, this is associated with that warm frontal boundary. Storm relative felicity values, a lot of spin in the atmosphere associated just behind that warm front. I think that's probably not going to foster a significant severe weather development event up there because, again, it's not really in that unstable environment. So, significant tornado parameters, you can't really see it super well because we're still not in the most updated NAM. The NAM model still needs to update, but we can't really see the greatest dynamic setup until we get the Sunday afternoon models for this event. So that's as far out. This is as far out as we have. The low pressure system kind of settling back here right now, and then allowing for this area to start to kind of develop some instability. And I think you might be able to see where the low is placed. Yeah, it places it lower to the south, and it will probably shift to the northeast. So there's still a lot of questions with regards to the track, and I'm probably going to do another update before the day actually comes in. So make sure to subscribe and stay updated. I'll probably do another video on Saturday evening. We'll have to see based on what the models do and what they say. But I am planning on storm chasing on Sunday afternoon, depending on whether that is in North Indiana or Lafayette. We'll have to see how things go out. But make sure to subscribe, and also check out that live stream planned. It's a scheduled live stream. You can get a notification on when the stream begins, and I will be out there with a crew, and we're going to be on it. So thanks for watching. I'll see you all later.